All right, class, welcome to 11.1. Back in the groove of making videos here. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the firm side of intermediate micro. And so we're going to talk about production today, short run particularly, get into diminishing marginal returns and talk about some economic insight for management. I have the fireworks in the background because I managed a fireworks tent. I like to think have maybe some experience, maybe more than the average academic economist in this. And so I'm looking forward to talking about production today. The reading is pages 172 to pages 184. And managing production is not straightforward, man. And economics can provide us some insight into how to do it. I'm not going to say that after this you'll be qualified to be the Goldman Sachs CEO or anything like that. But there are a lot of good concepts to fall back on, and some that I've fallen back on myself when managing a fireworks tent, which can be chaotic. So even if you're only managing yourself, so I recognize you probably haven't managed a fireworks tent, you probably haven't managed Goldman Sachs or any industries yet. So even if you're only managing yourself, there are some good insights here. So a good insight is the behavior of cost. So we're going to illustrate using examples of a restaurant fireworks tent. And I believe that it carries over into more complicated industries as well. And even if it's just managing yourself. So when you're producing something that you guys are producing right now is grades. And you can do that with a combination of different inputs. So you can use more time, you can get a better computer. There's a lot of different ways to get into that. So and there are some things where capital is better, and there's some things that labor is for. And so there's a trade-off to having either one of them. In production, firms are going to take inputs and turn them into something that they want to sell. And they're going to use a production process, which I'm going to call technology, to turn these inputs into outputs. And so all technology is just a method for combining the inputs that you have. The inputs that you have are capital, so things like land, buildings, equipment, laptops. For a fireworks tent, that would be like a tent and cashier, like iPad thing, and like a big old storage container to keep fireworks in that nobody could break into, a generator, which was a pain in the butt, and then labor. So you have hours of work by managers and skilled and non-skilled workers. So if you're producing grades, this is like how much time you spend in the library. If you're running a fireworks tent, it's like how many people do you have to help you carry fireworks, which can be exhausting after a long couple of weeks. And how many people do you have helping you in your tent? So if you have a lot of people come in, you need to have somebody running the cashier thing so you can sell people and tell them about the product. So anyway, there's some ways to think about capital and labor, and then materials. And so the outputs can be services or products. So we're going to have math here. So we're going to have a mathematical production function, which defines kind of the efficiency of how good a firm is at taking some of their inputs and turning it into outputs. And so a production function, all it is just the relationship between quantities of inputs used and the maximum quantity that can be produced. And so for an individual, your test grade is a function of your study time and class engagement, and whether or not you have a computer and pencils and pens. For like a McDonald's, the amount of burgers they can produce is a function of their workers, which is their labor, and their grills, which is their capital. And then for a hedge fund, the net worth of the fund or the financial performance of the fund is a function of how many finance majors they have working it and how many computers they have running trades at the same time. So these are like the math. And all I don't have like a plus here because I'm just being very general and abstract. It might be a multiplication. And so I'm going to give you some examples here. So some variations on the hedge fund theme. If we wanted to study kind of how labor inputs were important, we could say the net worth is a function of finance majors and lawyers to keep you out of trouble. If we were looking at a different hedge fund, we might want to add some complexity to the problem. So we might say net worth is a function of finance majors, lawyers, and computers at the firm. Like I said earlier, I could assume a functional form. So I could say our net worth is a function of finance majors plus the number of computers we have. I could say Hedge fund is a finance major's times computer, so they're complementary in production, which is probably more appropriate. If you're an individual, not a firm, you could say still your net worth is a function of how much you study, how much you work, and how much you study and work. And some of this might seem a little bit weird, but this is desirable. This level of abstraction is useful in thinking about what a production function is really like. And so we add the complications only as we need them, and it depends on which question we're asking whether or not we need them. And so just kind of as a side note, if we want to actually figure out what a firm's production function is, we have to estimate it with data, and we'd have to make some assumptions about what other things that we are not observing and including in our model, and that's what this other right here would be. And that's a whole new class. That's econometrics, to learn about that. But it's really important for interpreting data analysis. So if we have a fireworks tent that's using labor and capital, then the workers is the labor, and the tent and the storage container, the generator, and whatever else is the capital. Dog walking training, you have people and you have a leash as the capital. Try walking 2 dogs with 2 people and only 1 leash. It's important to think about which inputs you're using. Or try walking, having 1 leash, 1 dog, and 0 people. Or try walking 1 dog with 0 people and 10 leashes. It's pretty hard to walk a dog without that capital, so, or without the people to do it. And then a restaurant management, like I kind of mentioned earlier. And so this function is going to show us our maximum amount we can produce. And because firms aren't really interested in inefficient production processes, that would be saying something like the firm wants to hire 2 people to do 1 job. The inefficiency would add cost and reduce profits. So this is what firms are doing. And if you don't believe me, at a more personal level, when I'm running my fireworks tent, I don't even hire my friends. I don't even hire 2 of them if I really one of them. That is, if I can find any friends at the time. And so I'm just saying that businesses are trying to maximize a profit, not existing so that people can have jobs. It's kind of the assumption of the economic model. And it doesn't necessarily preclude that businesses have many stakeholders when they make decisions, like society and supply. And so, so businesses are hiring people to produce something, whether it's a friend to hire a cash register, Amazon worker packing boxes, accountant writing books. They're not just hiring to have a person on the payroll. So here's a graphical representation of what a production function might look like. And in this one, we're assuming that labor is variable. So we're looking at how output changes when labor changes, and capital is fixed. So we're not changing the amount of capital. We're holding the amount of capital constant. We're doing a little ceteris paribus analysis. And this is consistent with the idea that it's going to be hard to acquire specialized machines quickly. So in the short run, only 1 input is variable, and that input's labor. And that's why I have this kind of weird K here as constant capital. And you can see that as you add more workers, the amount of output that you get increases. And this should look kind of familiar or similar to a production possibility frontier, which is showing the amount of output of 2 goods, whereas last we only showed 1 goods output. And we've got wine and clothes here, and you can go here to the source link if you want to mess around with the production possibility frontier. And I'm going to bring this back in later in the presentation. And so time and variability of inputs, I want to talk more about this because right now we're just doing short run, but in the long run, when we're doing more optimization, firms will be able to choose both their amount of labor and capital. And so, but for right now, we're in the short run. So there's a length of time where a firm cannot adjust at least 1 input, and our fixed input is capital in the short run typically. And in the long run, they'll adjust all of their inputs. And Ben, how long is a short run? How long is a long run? And I'm just going to tell you, it depends on what the firm is or what they're producing. So if it's a janitorial service, long run, not that long. It's not very hard to acquire a new broom or a mop bucket or something. Now, car manufacturing could take a new factory years to come back online to adjust the amount of capital in your production processes. And if you're doing pistachio farming, it takes at least 10 years for trees to produce. And so it's going to take a while to adjust your capital in a pistachio farm. And so we want to characterize the relationship between how much inputs we have and how many outputs we have. We're not going to speak to the optimal level of production yet because firms aren't trying to maximize production. They're trying to maximize profit. And so production is only one side of that. The other side is costs, which we're going for next. Basically, if we maximize quantity, we run the risk of producing goods that are too expensive and that we can't sell for at least the cost of producing them in the market. And so we're going to use a managing five guys example. And so we have labor, or a number of workers, and our total output in terms of cheeseburgers per hour. So imagine you manage a Five Guys burger restaurant and you're thinking about how many workers you want to hire. And this graph here is showing the total amount of cheeseburgers you can produce for a given number of workers. And remember that capital is being held constant in the background because this is a short run. It's basically assuming that you can't just go down to Walmart and buy an industrial level grill for your McDonald's. And so at 0 workers, you get nothing. Not too surprising there. And after you hire the first worker, you have 2 units of output. And then you hire a second worker, and now you have a cashier and a cook. So you've got 7 burgers that you're creating. You keep hiring a third worker. Now you got someone at the drive-through, so you've got 11 burgers per hour. And then by the 7th worker, right here, there's nothing else for that worker to do. It's just he doesn't or she doesn't increase total productivity at all. Maybe there's just not enough capital because K is fixed. And then by the 8th person, people are running into each other. So you actually have total productivity declining on the 8th person. Spilling stuff, whatever. And so this is the concept of total productivity illustrated through a cheeseburger restaurant. But what we need to do is talk about other aspects of productivity that will be very important for optimizing decisions. And that is the marginal product of labor. So total productivity and marginal productivity are very related, but they're quite different. So marginal productivity is just the first derivative of the production function. And so if this is the total production as a function of capital and labor, the marginal product of labor is just taking the derivative of that with respect to labor. And if you're intimidated by calculus, and what you can think about is instead that the marginal product of labor is the change in the amount of units that we can produce if we change the amount of labor that we're using for it. And if you've never run a business, which you haven't, probably this is analogous to producing a grade in a class. So your grade is a function of your study time, which we can call that labor. And pencils, capital 1, computers, capital 2. And let's just say like you can't order a laptop overnight. So like capital is fixed. Your marginal product of studying, or how much grade improvement you can get from studying a little more, is the change in your grade given a change in study time. Not that hard. And so you've probably made decisions like this, even if you haven't thought of it explicitly in this mathematical way. And so, again, if you were kind of intimidated, if we add another worker, the amount we produce goes from 2 to 7, from 1 to 2. And so the marginal product of adding the second worker is 5. Adding the 5th worker is only getting 2 out of that, like we said, because the change in output is 16 to 14, 2, and we've only got 1 new worker, so the marginal product is 2 in that case. And I'll talk a little bit more about why it's smaller than 5 in a second, although I hope you can grasp it on an intuitive level at this point. And this is a graph of the marginal productivity of adding new workers. And you can see that adding the 7th worker is 0. You get nothing new out of that 7th worker. And then adding the 8th worker, it's negative. So adding an 8th worker has negative marginal productivity and brings your total productivity down. And so this is hopefully demonstrating how you can calculate a marginal product from knowing how much extra product 1 worker gives you. And so this is kind of a graph putting total productivity and marginal productivity together and contrasting them in these bullets. So total productivity from 0 to 6 workers, yeah, total productivity is increasing. From 6 to 7 workers, it's constant. That 7th worker is not adding anything. And then from 7 on, total productivity is falling. And you can see in marginal productivity that it's getting steeper here. So marginal productivity is increasing from 1 to 2 workers, and marginal productivity for that reason is sloped upwards. And then the slope of total productivity starts to get smaller, and so that's why this marginal productivity curve is sloping down and eventually goes negative. And so what we've got here is diminishing marginal productivity, and you can see it here with this picture filling in where you've got increasing marginal productivity to 2 workers, decreasing from 2 to 7, and then negative marginal productivity from 7 onwards. And so I hope that helps you visualize what's happening and the differences between total and marginal productivity. And then one last thing we got to hit on is the difference between average productivity and marginal productivity. And so we've already seen the first 3 columns here, and now I've added this average product column. An average product is just the total product divided by the quantity of workers that you have. And so if you produce 2 and you have 1 worker, then your average product per worker is 2. And if you've got 2 workers and your total product is 7, then you've got 3.5 burgers per worker, which is different than marginal productivity. So remember, these 2 things are different. And something I think is helpful to remember is that this is exactly analogous to adding a semester's GPA to your accumulated GPA or cumulative GPA. And so if your GPA of your current term or semester is greater than your accumulated GPA, then you can expect your GPA to increase. While if your current GPA is lower than your accumulated or cumulative GPA, you can expect your GPA to decrease. And so your current GPA is kind of your marginal GPA, while your accumulated GPA is kind of your average. And so you can see when your marginal GPA is greater than your average, it's pulling up your average product. And then when your marginal grade is less than your accumulated grade, it's going to bring your grade point average down. And so when this marginal product is below this average product, then this average product starts to slope down. And so this is kind of the point I wanted to make with production functions, is that some people are doing macro-oriented group projects, and this is a good way to think about it, in that this is a really micro-oriented view of economic growth, in that we see that how do you get economic growth? Well, you get better technology. And so how does technology help you? You can see here, this is our original production function. And then this light blue line is what happens when our technology improves for this good. You can see that at every number of workers, we can produce more than we could before. And that's just because this technology, this A term, got larger. And our technology got better. So like when I create a research table, learning how to use a computer to put the research table together is better than manually taking it out and copying and pasting it in Excel. I can just use Python to snap together the table results. This would be like also when a professor uses an automated grading system compared to like what I do for you guys, which is like manually going through and checking. You can also use a laptop instead of going to the library for your students. So if you want to search up research articles or background information on a topic, you don't have to go to the library. You can just use a laptop. And so you can substitute out some, or you can improve your production process that way. And this is kind of analogous, this improvement in technology, to a shift out in the production possibility frontier, which you've already hopefully seen. And so what happens here is this is like the original one, like earlier, and now our technology for producing wine has gotten better. And so what happens is without anything else changing, we have the same labor, same capital, we can produce only like slightly under 600 here, and now we're producing 900 here. And that's just because our wine technology has improved. And this is only for like one good. So this would be like realistic for analyzing Lemonade Stand and iPhone because they don't share production processes. But if we had like an improvement in processing performance, then it would probably improve a PS5 and an Xbox Series X. And so in this picture, we have an improvement in a good specific technology. That is just, we have separate A's for either good. A being our measure of how good technology is. And so production is super important for a lot of practical questions in any industry, even for just, your own personal decision making. And we're also going to be using it in a lot of upcoming lectures to talk about cost minimization and optimal firm decision making. And in the next class, I'll add the next aspect of the firm behavior to this, which is firm costs. Anyway, thank you, and I will catch up with you later.